Hello there, Tolkien Fanatics, and welcome back to the next video in the Match Play Guide Scenario Breakdown series. So last time I talked about domination from Pool 2 of the Hold objective scenario, and today I'm going to go big, and I'm going to go from Pool 2 to Pool 4. Just doubled it there. And I'm going to be talking about a kill the enemy scenario. So this should be a little bit of a shorter episode because it's a pretty straightforward scenario. So kill the enemy. It is kill the enemy. I'm sorry. Kill the enemy is the scenario. Is the pool. To the death is going to be the scenario that we're going to talk about today. All right, there we go. And that is, believe it or not, scenario 2. So look at that. I'm going big here. Moving up from pool 2 to pool 4, from scenario 1 to scenario 2. Yeah. It's almost like I planned this. No, I really didn't. I just kind of picked one of my favorites, which is domination, and then I was like, okay, well, let's talk about one that is a killing scenario because people like those. And to the death is a pretty common one. So to the death is one of those scenarios where if you're, I recommend using it as an army tryout. Like if you're trying out a new army for the first time and you want to see how good it is, just from a synergistic standpoint, because a lot of armies out there now are built for synergy, I highly recommend using this scenario to work that out. The reason being because the objectives are pretty simple. It is literally just to kill the enemy. You're going to kill, and kill some more. There's no specific layout for this scenario. Just set your 4x4 board to whatever you want. Have a decent amount of terrain. I've heard people say that boards that I use either have too much terrain, too little terrain, just right terrain. I recommend you do what you want to do. And remember, guys, if you're new to the game, terrain can be anything. Terrain is literally supposed to just be some sort of line of sight blocker and something to break up, movement, so you don't have like a 24 model long, sword and shield wall. That's a bit ridiculous. You don't want that. So just take a candle. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm a Bath and Body Works guy when it comes to smell good candles. So I've got like 10 of those 3-wick candles because I go and stock up come Black Friday sale. Take 3 or 4 or 5 of those, just drop them in randomly on a 4-foot by 4-foot board. Boom. You got yourself some line of sight blockers, and you've got some movement breakup things. You can go a little bit farther. I've got one of those long stem lighters. I could take that and plop it right down, standing up. There you go. Another line of sight blocker, a barrier, and more movement breakup. So your board doesn't have to be specific. It can just be however you want it to be. Just do what you can. I mean, there's no specifics on how you have to do it. Especially, like I said, if you're a new player trying to get into the game, you just need something to kind of help break up, a 4-foot by 4-foot table. Okay, so that's enough. Back to the scenario at hand. Got off, my bad. So starting positions for this one's a little bit different. So domination was a 24-inch deployment area, meaning you had your entire side. So this is, again, you and your opponent roll a d6. Highest rolling player gets to pick the side of the board he wants to deploy on. But this time you're only deploying on 12 inches, and that's the back 12 of your board. So your board is split in half. You're always going to have the halves. That's how you know which side you're going to play on. And then when you deploy, you're deploying from the edge of the board to 12 inches in. Now there is no restriction on this. You just cannot deploy further than 12 inches on the edge of your board half. Okay? Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. So, like I said, the objective is to kill the enemy. This game goes like domination until somebody has been quartered, which is 25% of your army left alive. So the VPs for this one is a little bit different. Usually there's, objectives to try and get, like for the domination one, some objective markers or something like that. This one's really all about breaking and being unbroken. If you can break your opponent and be unbroken, which is really hard to do for this scenario due to the fact that the game goes until 25%. It's very common to see somebody break and then within, I'd say 2 turns, if they haven't lost the game or been quartered themselves, they usually will break their own enemy. Now, that's not to say it's going to happen every time, because there are going to be scenarios where you just get the army you're playing against is totally a perfect foil for yours, and you have no ability to do any damage to them whatsoever. But if you can find a way to break your opponent and be unbroken, that is how you're going to score almost 50% of the possible 12 victory point total you could get. Another thing is if you do reduce your enemy to 25%, which is that is the name of the scenario, to the death, then you score some victory points that way. Leader wounds are the 1-3 type scenario, so 1 for wounding, 3 for killing. And this is actually a scenario where you can get a few victory points for having a banner or taking away your opponent's banner. So if you have a banner and your opponent has a banner, cool, you guys get some points. But if you have a banner and your opponent doesn't, then you get more points. So that's a good thing. So if you go into a list, we'll take fiefdoms for examples, one I've talked about before on other channels, and I'm sure a few times here. If you play fiefdoms, you usually don't take a banner since Imrahil counts as a 12-inch banner for including himself with the army bonus. So I don't usually take one. I don't see the point in sinking 25 points worth of my army into a banner when I already have a 24-inch diameter banner running around the board, as long as I can keep my leader alive. That being said, if I were to play that and then go against an enemy like, say, Uruk-hai, who usually have a banner, so you're playing Isengard, they take a banner, you're probably going to try and go kill that banner. That being said, if you're that guy with the banner and your enemy doesn't, you're probably hiding that banner for all you're worth. As crazy as that is to say. I have been in situations where that is the case, and I have hid my banner for anything and everything I could possibly do. That way I could score myself some VPs that way. And that can be the difference sometimes between winning and losing. So that's pretty much everything. I've already started talking about some of the key points. The banner is big. I think banner and trying to get to enemy leader, this is actually when you actually want to try and wound or kill the enemy leader. If you can get into it where, because of the long distance, you're starting at a minimum 24 inches apart. If you're a shooting heavy army, you're going to enjoy this scenario. I recommend using your shooting to score some VPs like I just talked about. Either taking your opponent's banner out if you don't have one, that way you nullify his ability to score, or taking his out while protecting yours in order to boost your score, or shooting at your enemy's leader with the possibility of maybe getting a wound in, or at least knocking out a couple points of fate, so later on in the game you can go ahead and score a wound. Of course, that being said, some leaders are easier to wound than others. So the other way to score the VPs for this scenario, like I said, the biggest one is breaking. Shoot your enemy. If you're going up against an enemy that has a, we'll say an elite heavy army, okay? Let's look at Iron Hills. So Iron Hills is a very elite heavy army. If you're shooting with Strength 2 bows, you're shooting into Defense 8 shield wall. Well, personally, I think I'm going to go ahead and shoot at Dane best I can. Because then I'm going to get a 50-50 chance of hitting his pig. Because, again, if you don't take your big heroes mounted, you're just hurting yourself in the long run. Because you're killing more than 50% of their killing power. 3 attacks, yeah, that's great. But if you're mounted and charged, you get 4, and you win, you knock down, you're now at 8 attacks. So if you're only putting your hero on foot, you're literally restricting yourself to 3 of a possible 8 attacks. That's, 37.5% if I'm doing my math right off the top of my head. Yeah, so let's see, 3 divided by 8. Yeah, 37.5%. So you're taking away 62.5% of your main hero's killing power. Why wouldn't you mount them to get 62.5% more? Basically more than double. But to each their own. So that being said, if you're going up against an enemy who's got a mounted hero like that, that is a possibility where you might want to shoot at them and take them down. Another thing, if it's a horde army, say you're playing hobbits or ruffians, and usually they have a lot of shooting, horde armies do. Some horde armies don't. I'm looking at Goblin Town specifically when I say this. But in that case, a lot of times those horde armies will usually hide their heroes because their leaders are not very good in combat. So just shoot and try and take out as many models as you can. because it's going to be very hard to break them. Yeah, usually Horde armies have low fight value and low defense, so you're going to be able to go walk in there and smash the heck out of them. But when you start taking a few losses, their greater numbers multiply on top of you very fast. And it's not long before you're throwing 1 dice in the fight, they're throwing 4. You roll a 5 high, they get a 6. Now you're surrounded. Now they're throwing 8 dice to wound you, needing 6s. Oh, hey, they got it. So try and whittle some numbers down. Not a bad idea, you know. Looking at some strategies, Heroic March is very important for this scenario in particular. So if you play an army and you don't have Heroic March available to you, I'm sorry, because this scenario, you're going to hate it, especially if you're an army that doesn't have a lot of shooting. I personally don't usually play a lot of shooting in my armies. That being said, a lot of my armies are high mobility. So I don't care for shooting because I'm getting to you really, really quick. I don't care if you can shoot 20 shots at me if I'm getting on top of your butt within a turn and a half. So don't do you any good if you've got a lot of points dropped in shooting if I can get on top of you. So that's sometimes where you kind of got to balance your army out. I don't have Heroic March, but I have high mobility. Or I do have Heroic March, but I don't have high mobility. So maybe it's a good idea to maybe take 2 guys who can march. That way you're not relying on specifically one. There is another scenario, Reconnoiter, where having multiple guys with march can be a good thing. So moving along, elite heavy armies love this scenario as long as they have the ability to get some mobility. There you go. Again, Iron Hills is not going to like it a lot because I think Dane has March, and then you can take the Captain, but Iron Hills is one of those lists that's already lacking on might points. So how do you make up for that? Well, as sorry as it is for me to say this, because I freaking hate the hell out of them, siege equipment can be very useful for this. I will say siege equipment is cool. I think they are just drastically underpointed. The Iron Hills Chariot, or the Iron Hills Ballista getting pointed to 125. That's probably where the starting point for all large, what do you call them? I just lost my train of thought. Siege weapons should be. All siege weapons should be in the 100 to 125, maybe even more. I honestly think the Iron Hills Ballista probably needs to be pointed up again, maybe closer to 150. Because it can really just wreck a day. I've seen a lot of stupidity with siege weapons. But they can be useful for elite heavy armies. So if you're playing in Iron Hills, Iron Hills Ballista is really great for the scenario because then you're going to... Yeah, you can sit back if you want, but I highly recommend you still move towards your enemy because at least every turn you're going to get a shot with the ability to knock down your opponent and kind of wreck his marching lines a little bit. So there is that. As crazy as it is to say, I will recommend looking at that for Iron Hills. Of course, I don't think Iron Hills would be as good if they didn't have the Iron Hills Ballista. If you take that away, I don't see that army doing very good without it. And when I say I don't see it, I literally mean I don't see it doing good. I've seen Iron Hills armies that don't run with it, and they don't do very good. Yes, they may win a game or two here and there, but they don't have the staying power in the long run across all 12 scenarios. 18 match play guide scenarios now to go the distance. So moving along, let's see. I've talked about mobility. I've talked about Horde, shooting armies. I mean, let's look. Corsairs, Serpent Horde, Faramir's Rangers, those kind of armies. You like this scenario until the enemy gets to you. Because I say that because while Serpent Horde and Faramir's Rangers, they're really good because Serpent Horde can get 50% bows, ability to reroll 1s. If you take, I think it's the Betrayer, you get to reroll all failed wounds or something like that. And then Faramir's Rangers is basically, you can play the entire army with all bows, which is how I usually play it. At 800 points, you kind of have to take a captain and a few troops. Just because you can't max out. But you can get like 50-something bow shots. And it's really cool. It works out really great until your enemy gets on top of you and you realize, hey, I've only got defense 4 guys and I'm getting my butt killed. So stuff like that. Corsairs, they are a shooting heavy army just because of the fact that the Arbalesters are very good. The weakness to that is the fact that you only get a third of them. So while Arbalesters can do a lot of damage, they can be mitigated by using the terrain for coverage as well as using marches to get on top of your opponent. So that's pretty much everything I can think of in regards to this scenario. Just some final thoughts. Like I said, banners, banners, banners. If you have one, protect it. If your enemy has one, seek it out. I mean, if you don't have one, definitely seek out your enemies. If neither of you do have it, then you can just kind of ignore that. And I would recommend, if your opponent doesn't have a banner and you don't have a banner, focus on going for the break. Because again, the breaking is a good thing. Because if you're playing against a horde army in particular, usually horde armies have lower courage, so they can start fleeing a lot faster. And that's just in general as well. Once an enemy breaks, yeah, a lot of armies now have at least one hero of legend in them, so they're going to get that auto pass in the first turn. But you never know when a mid-tier hero completely botches their courage check on like a 1-1 roll, and they're only courage 5. So, and they have no might left, and they're only a 1-wheel model. Then so it's like, bye, see ya. So a lot of those, mid-tier heroes are usually the little bit of backbone and glue that help keeps an army together. So taking that away, especially in key areas too, can end up causing more troops to run and also the army to break down and be 25%, quartered quicker. All right, this is a popular scenario, I would say. Just my one last thought. Definitely practice it. I think with new armies, very good for that. Between this one and Lords of Battle, which I'll talk about in my next 6 video series, the second part to this 3-part overall series I'm doing. But this is one you do still see a lot at events. I think I included it at one of my last 2 events. I want to say I included it in. I can't remember if I included it in Great Battle Carolinas or Ringo South. I want to say I included it in Great Battle Carolinas in February. But that being said, if it's a 2-day, 5-round event, you've got a good chance of seeing this. I think Lords of Battle kind of mitigates this scenario because it mitigates horde armies, and a lot of people are like anti-horde armies, which is sad. That's just another thing. The community is good, but it's not perfect. There's a lot of whining about certain rules and stuff. So some things you'll see, you'll usually see. Not Lords of Battle, I'm sorry. We're talking about To the Death. You'll usually see To the Death in a 2-day event. It was a lot more popular before they came out with the 6 new scenarios, but with the new scenarios, it's kind of tapered off a little bit. But it's still there. I'd say if you go to 3 events, it'll probably be in at least one of them. So not something to completely ignore. And as I've stated at least 3 times now, very good for testing out a new army. All right, guys, so that is a lot longer than I expected to go into. Hopefully you guys gleaned some good information out of this. If you have any questions or corrections, please leave them in the comments section below. And as always, guys, please enjoy Tolkien's Legendarium in his extremity. I will see you next time. Please like, share, subscribe. Let's beat those damn YouTube analytics. And take care, y'all.